Welcome to the next episode of Mom's Open Table. I have with me the magnificent ShallowLines slash GeneT, another gem here on the Looking for Mom YouTube channel. Hello. What do you prefer me to call you by today?
I think I think I shifted to ShallowLines when Discord went. We all shifted to a single name. GeneT is fine. ShallowLines is more of a name I've used for a while for flash poetry or Route 50 kind of things, a story in a paragraph, and I shifted over when Discord. Either one is good.
All right, cool. I'll go with GeneT then. How about you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm GeneT. I live on the East Coast of the United States. I'm 56. I was in the military for over 20 years. I've traveled to 3 continents and been to 50 countries and been all over the world, really, and settled on the East Coast. I sort of lurked, really, with RPGs since I was a kid. Andrew and I are probably at the age of actual Stranger Things, maybe 5 or 7 years earlier, because some of the tech they had on there we didn't have. It was a different world, really. I mostly played hit or miss now and then I did a lot of play by post because I was overseas, lived in Spain, lived in Japan, lived in a couple other countries, was deployed for quite some time, mainly to work on writing chops, really, characterization, scene description. So I played pay by post a lot. I had a pretty long game on an old program called OpenRPG, which was a D20 modern for a year. I had a pretty long play by post called Hidden Riders of Zitra that was over 50,000 posts. And then, life is busy. I did a lot of play by post on RPG Crossing. And then near the end of COVID, I had a job change and I started playing again on Discord because it's kind of hard to find a group in person, really. That's me, really, in a nutshell, sort of.
Do you still do play by post at all?
No, time is still really busy, even though my kids are older. I'd hate to say my kids are almost the age of my ear. So,
yeah, she's just the baby.
I still work a number of days. I have 2 other days that I have to do take care of family members, do family things. And I was running 3 games a week. And so you have limited time, really. I can't really do that after work. My brain is kind of dead. And so I don't really do play by post. I only have a limited bandwidth.
So I'm curious. I've never done play by post before. I think maybe in the old days. I mean, I'm talking when you had the acoustic coupler modems and you had the little
14K baud.
Exactly. We had the little posts and I remember there was a community online at that time. It was a forum where people would kind of play by post, I suppose, where they would just tell little stories. But since then, I haven't really done that. But I know that there is, excuse me, a large community out there that actually enjoys and prefers play by post. I'm curious to know, what do you find in terms of difference between normal TTRPG gaming, where everyone's sitting at a table, virtual or not, versus play by post?
Play by post can be roughly the same, but you have a lot of other time to consider what your post will be. And for me, it was writing characterization for NPCs, writing the moment, describing the moment, in that. So you can't kind of you can fine tune it a little bit, because when you're writing, you can change your language. For me, it was really about language. Now, lots of people play by post pretty similar to what we do. And it can be pretty bare bones too, where the scene is very short. You're just rolling. And it has a little bit different feel. If you get a good group, like a lot of places, especially those who want to characterize their, you can get some degree of inner depth that you may not get with at the table, because players can express what their characters are thinking. And even though it's that kind of meta knowledge, they don't necessarily do that thing. You can actually see their difficulty with certain situations, how at its best, you can learn the story of that character in a slightly deeper manner that may be hidden when you're playing a real game. So some of us in a real game, we may develop a character that has some degree of backstory, which we play to learn the character, but we lose that kind of internal monologue, that internal difficulty with that decision. That we may show that in an RPG, in a very narrative game, um, but the skill of doing that live improv is a little bit different than writing it, where you have time to think about what that character is thinking and feeling, and then finding words to express that in a way. It's a different kind of way. And so for some people who don't have the comfort to do that visually, or maybe they don't feel like they can do that on the spur, or delve deeper into that character's difficulty or angst with a decision or how they respond, it can do that, perhaps, because it is difficult to do that on the fly.
So
It
how long are these posts typically? Like, do they write like short novellas, or are they
can be
decent?
long,
Yeah,
can
yeah.
be pretty long, can be pretty short. It's inherently has the same problems that you do at the table. People taking too long to write their post, or if you have to have the same sort of thing, like a time limit, like, and as you're running those type of games, you may put a time limit. And some of them will say, okay, as a GM, I'm going to post every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You respond to that post in that 2 days, that 48 hours or 72 hours. And that's kind of work where you have kind of guidelines on how that game is going to be run. That's sometimes how it works the best. If you leave it to, I'm going to wait for everyone to post and then post, then it can be problematic, because some people are busy and they may not post right away, or they may take too long to post, or they may ghost. And so the best games like that are GMs that have a limit, that say, okay, I'm going to post twice a week and I expect you to post within a day or 2 days. Lots of games who get really going, you don't really have to do that. In my one game, I would have 7, 8 posts a day, like, uh, and they can be long paragraphs. So the other caveat is, it's kind of like reading a book. You have to like that format. Um, it's just like me. I can't really listen to an audiobook because my mind wanders, and then I'm 30 pages later, I'm like, okay, how did I get here? Because I can't do an audiobook. I have to read the book, but I can't have someone reading the book for me. It just doesn't work that way. And so play by post that way, especially if you got very narrative players, the post can be pretty long. But other times, like combat, it can be pretty short too.
I was going to ask about that. Like, how does character interaction, especially something like combat, where you're waiting, like everyone takes their turn,
Um,
waiting 2 or 3 days for the next swing of a sword could be kind of painful.
yeah, that can be painful if you don't have guidelines. Usually, when I've done it, there's no initiative, number one. And so if you have initiative, you can do initiative, but if you have initiative and you have like 5 or 6 people playing, then you're waiting for this person to take their initiative. And that can be difficult. So it's kind of like popcorn initiative. Like, you post when you can, and then everyone else adjusts to that post that they're posting afterwards, especially in something like combat or a scene or that sort of thing. Because strict initiative, I find, really slogs things down. If someone is busy and they can't post for a day or two, that kind of initiative may not work. So it's more popcorn initiative. It's more, okay, here's the scene, go. And then each of us respond at a time frame. may follow the post and realize, okay, we can't post for 36 hours or whatever, or 2 days, and we do. And then the other thing is you let the players adjudicate their failures, or the best way is you let the players adjudicate their failures or successes. Like what happens, you give them reins, kind of like we do in narrative play. You give them reins to describe how they succeed, how they fail. So they know they fail. You have a dice roller and they know what happens. And you can let them take the narrative reins of what that failure and success looks like rather than waiting for you to tell you. And um, it, that's kind
That
of the way.
that is interesting. Yeah, because I'm wondering, you do use like online dice rollers, and
Right.
so you're not okay. Um, it kind of
And
segues into
I largely played a very crunchy game like Pathfinder with it, which isn't like, because when I played it, I hadn't been playing Free League or some of the other systems I do now, so it could be a lot more crunchy. So you still have to do like we all would do. You still have to manage when to roll the dice, when not to roll the dice, and also giving narrative control. If they want to roll the dice to see if they, especially in a social, or that's what happens, and they fail, what does that look like? Sometimes they wait for you, sometimes they don't. It just depends on, as with most groups, even in person, how that works.
that kind of segues into the next topic I want to talk to you about, in the sense that I guess in this, I don't know if it's fair to say post D&D worlds, and like, since OGI, I think there's been a lot more interest in other types of games other than D&D. And I've noticed personally, I don't know if this is true across the board, but I've noticed that there has been a shift towards more narrative style play, and that might be influenced by shows like Critical Role or Dimension 20, where the story takes a lot more space, and the mechanics and the crunchiness of these games like D&D or Pathfinder kind of takes a back seat. Where do you find yourself in the spectrum? Like what kind of games draw you?
That's kind of an odd sort of thing, because we grew up, I probably played my first game in the 80s, flat out first edition AD&D, going through a dungeon with little graph paper and on a summer when your parents are at work, and we were latchkey kids, so no one was around back then. We had a list of chores to do, and sometimes we did that before mom came home, and sometimes we didn't. But then I played as an older adult, maybe, especially now. At the moment, I think you can do a narrative play with any system, regardless of its crunchiness. And I've played Rollmaster and really crunchy games, and I've backed some other games, like one called Broken Empires, which is simulation light. And there's this huge, wide, you can do that with those games. You just have to manage when you use the dice and how often, and what do those dice rolls mean? I think that you can play Pathfinder in a narrative style. You're just perhaps not rolling as often as you think. And you can use those dice to guide your narrative. I do think that slimmer systems, which is, Free League has a pretty wide range of crunchy versus not. Symbaroum is not a non-crunchy game, which I run that, whereas some other games are much more narrative. Blade Runner, Coriolis, maybe, that they're kind of on the crunchy end. And you can do that with any game. I find I'm more narrative. I have shifted that way, but not because I have a story planned. I largely play off the cuff and develop the story as we go. Especially, that's the way I like to play a lot. But I find I'm more narrative. It's finding the right players to do that, and then riding the dice when there's consequences. I really like lighter systems. I played also things like Roll for Shoes, diceless games, which you really have to be creative with those dice rolls. I think I like that style more, but I do like a little bit of consequence. What does the dice go? And I also fail forward. And so the consequence isn't necessarily, which sometimes GMs get in trouble. The consequence isn't that they fail. And so, especially for actual plays, there's a variety of them. If you're trying to do an actual play for entertainment, there has to be a backbone of story in there that you may preconceive, which may not be necessarily the way I play normally. Where GMs get in trouble is they rely on the dice to get them from point A to point B to point B, but dice never work. And so the problem they may get into is they fail. They fail at that crux between point A and point B, and they have trouble getting point B because they've relied on the dice, but the characters are fail. The thing to do is let them go there, but there's consequences. What is that consequence?
I've seen memes out there about this whole narrative style trend, I guess, where there is often a misconception that there are only two people at table. There's the players who have a lot of narrative control in these types of games, and the GM kind of guides the story. But there's actually a third thing at the table, and that's a dice.
Right.
And they themselves can influence or tell their own story.
And I think you learn, like the dice also, we all have variabilities and backgrounds in life and experiences, and learning how to narrative play or be a storyteller is not simple. And you learn the more you play, just like a GM. The more you GM, better you get. It's with anything. It's a violin, it's riding a bike, it's doing art, it's doing whatever, doing woodworker. The more you do, the better you get. Same thing with a player. The more you do, the better you get. Sometimes the dice help you develop that narrative that you're not thinking about. And you have to think about, what does this failure look like? What does this marginal success like? And it may help players learn how to be narrative necessarily.
Yeah.
Like it gives them a little leg up, because the reality is, if you think your game is going to be like what you watch for entertainment, it's going to be difficult, because it is a game for stress relief and fun, and there's a variety of ways to have fun, which doesn't mean that it has to be narrative. It could be crunchy. There are players who like to roll dice and see what happens. Oh, I lost my leg. The dice said I did. And what does that look? Whereas other players just, okay, I lost something. What does that mean? Or what does that failure mean? And so I think because of the internet and because of the entertainment value, you're losing a subset of players that are there for fun and stress relief, who may just be there to watch, who don't feel as comfortable doing narration, who like dice and min-maxing, and you have to kind of, at a home table, you have to manage those different kind of play styles. It's great for the thespians of us, but it's not necessarily great for people who, and board games are the same. My son hates European worker placement games. They just aggravate the heck out of him. But give him an asymmetric game like Onitami, he's going to thrive. Whereas my daughter, she will kill you at a worker placement game. And it's the same sort of thing with role-playing games regarding narration. You can do it. You can have great fun in a crunchy game. It just requires a little bit different. And it may be important for other players who aren't narrators that they still have fun playing it, or they had that war game background where this game came about. We're old enough to necessarily have played that way in first edition AD&D, and that's still fun. Is that going to fly on YouTube for entertainment? Probably not, because it's not a miniseries.
So we talked about this, like behind the scenes, like the GMs at Looking for Mom. Like what? I mean, we've grown out of like people who have never streamed before, really just played home games, and
I never did.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, hey, let's give this a shot. I think we've learned, just even over the course of the year, the difference between producing an actual play and what actually draws viewers versus a home game, and I'm not. And what are your thoughts on this? The fact that there are like very popular like actual plays out there, Critical Role, Dimension 20. There's a handful of others too. Do you think they're doing a disservice to the
No, not really.
TTRPG community
I
by
don't think so.
kind of holding up this? I want all my home games to look like this epic kind of highly produced thing.
Um, First of all, a caveat: I don't watch those. I just don't have time, and just like having an audiobook playing, I wander. And so watching something like Critical Role or actual plays, I actually go watch actual plays to maybe learn about the system, maybe watch how a GM does that if I can grope what he's doing or she's doing behind the scenes as a GM, like, okay. And so I have very low, I don't really go watch Critical Role and some other things. I've watched a number of things, but largely I'm going to watch an actual play to learn the game system, the mechanics, maybe get a feel of the genre. So there is a caveat. I think that Critical Role and that sort of thing has done a great service to role-playing games in general. And the reality is that we grew up at a different age. We grew up when, I grew up before D&D was the demon. And it's a different time in the 70s and 80s. And role-playing games were this nerdy, different outcast kind of group. And it was very difficult to especially as a military brat who was moving every 3 to 4 years and who was 4'9" until the 10th grade and really smart, which gets you in more trouble than you know. It's hard to find a group. I think the internet and the blossoming of RPGs is really related to those type of actual plays where people have found RPGs as a game, just like some of this other wealth. I don't think they've done a disservice to giving a false impression of what a game should be like. I think if you're going to become a game and you'd like to play a game like that, you're going to have friends who also want to do that. Just like if you're going to want to play a crunchy Pathfinder, Rollmaster, Sim-like game, you're going to have friends who like that too. I think the internet and YouTube, I didn't start playing again until Discord and 3-4 years ago. Aside from Play by Post, I think they've done a great service. I don't think that someone who wants to play a narrative game, they're going to have to learn how to do it anyways, like any GM. Like, it's complicated. And you're going to make mistakes, lots of them. Even in a narrative play, I don't necessarily think that a railroad is bad or a linear plot is bad, but how to make that feel fluid and seemingly organic without the players necessarily know they're on that path. Or they can know that too. It might be fun for them. Is a different type of skill than wide open developing a plot line as you go. I think they've done a great service as far as RPGs blossoming this last, 5-10 years. Like, it's crazily different than it was when we grew up. I mean, I've gone into a bookstore and there was no RPG. When I was a kid, my parents gave me $10 for Christmas when I was like starting in 3rd grade, and we would go to the bookstore 2 days after Christmas, and it was one of the best things during Christmas holidays. I had this $10 to buy books. You've never found an RPG book in a bookstore, ever. And now you can go in a bookstore and you can find a couple shelves of them. They may not have all the things you're looking for, but completely different than what we went to the bookstore where there was nothing. And as a kid, you wouldn't use that $10 to buy that game anyways, because you had these 8-9 other books you wanted to get. No, why am I going to buy that one? I can get these 8 other fantasy books. I'm going to get those. But I think they've done a good thing as far as the RPG blossoming, like so many games now, and different styles. That's, I think, where narrative play came about. Like, how can we play this game differently? It didn't stay this old school thing. And I like old school, but it didn't necessarily stay that. How can we take narrative play even in old school, and how can we even decrease dice use, how do we use the dice differently?
So speaking of other games, I mean, on Looking for Mom, you are running a Mothership game, and on your other Discord server, which you co-host with the beginner tabletop hobos, you're running a Symbaroum game.
I
So
started
how?
with. Go ahead.
So go ahead.
I started with Forbidden Lands.
Okay,
When
which
I
is a very
came
crunchy system.
when I came back to play, I left play by post. I was starting telework, and I had this Forbidden Lands game because even though I didn't play, we collect. I mean, I got thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Magic cards, and I started playing Magic back in Revised in 1995. But even if we don't play, we collect. I reading a RPG book is just like reading a fantasy book for me now. Like, and especially now because they can be so broad, so big, so world building that it's the same sort of thing. I started with Forbidden Lands, which is pretty crunchy to cut my teeth. No one was really running the game, so I started running it every Friday. And when I first started running it, I ran it procedurally. I would go in the book, I would roll some dice, I would find 5 or 6 different events, 5 or 6 different monsters, find 2 or 3 different maps, like from Logos Online, and then I would have all this stuff, and I would ask them what direction you're going, because Forbidden Lands is an exploration. Are you going east, west, south? Are you going to the forest? Are you going to the mountains? And then I would,
All right.
right, I would make up something that they were going to go in this direction. After about 3 or 4 months, I stopped doing that at all. I just said, we're playing on Friday. No plan. And the way I did that was I would write 10 or 15 sentences, very brief, and I might have a couple monsters that might come and play or a couple places, but I had no idea where they were going, what they were going to engage with. And I would just ad-lib it. If something came up, I would roll dice and look at my list, and my list was very short. One very fun adventure, the goblin who beginner was running failed his overnight watch roll. I said, well, what happens? And I rolled on the table, and the sentence I came up with is a dwarf and a dragon. I have no idea what a dwarf and a dragon means, but that's what's happening. And we played, which ad-lib, narrative style, off the cuff, single sentence. I made it up as we went, and it was fantastic and hilarious and a lot of fun.
Yeah. So do you prefer that style of play where it is less like a prepared adventure for you versus?
I prepare, as you know, prepared adventures are great. They give you this backbone, but you're never going to go down that path. And the best thing you can do is to know what the world wants and why it wants it and what it's going to give to get it or what it's going to give up to not get it. And then use that prepared adventure because you have no idea how the players are going to engage with it. And a lot of my play is I have this prepared adventure like they're doing, like I'm playing Agrella's adventure in Symbaroum, right? And it has this backbone that they're invested in this city. But then I throw a lot of these things at them because I kind of use Sly Flourish's Lazy DM in some, and as a GM, I've read lots of books on how to GM and I watched lots of different things, and I take things that work for me. One of the things is, who are the characters? First, who are the players and what do they like? Some like combat, some like social, some like open narrative, some like to roll dice, and my table is pretty open. So who are they? What are they like? What are their characters and how do they make them and what makes them tick and what buttons are there? What buttons can I push on them? And then the world, how many buttons of the world have they pushed and what does that look like? And then I throw stuff at them without a plan. So even though they're on this written adventure that I have to adjust in many different ways so it fits with what they're doing, is sometimes I throw things at them that they bite on and then they want to go down that way, which is way off the path from where they might have to go. How do I take that written adventure and seg it and fade it into what else they're doing? And that happens.
So I think what you're describing is a pretty, I don't advanced, if that's the right word. Like, I don't think anyone coming new into game mastering would have that experience or skill to be able to ad lib on the spot. And
Yeah, and I didn't either. This,
so, what advice would you have for new GMs, like when they're starting out? Like,
so when I started playing Forbidden Lands, there's a degree of nervousness about being a GM. And first of all, I would tell people that they have to want to be a GM, because if they don't want to be a GM, or they think they're forced to be a GM because no one's being a GM, it's part of the love of being a player. They got to like it. I wouldn't be a GM if I didn't get a lot of satisfaction over doing that, especially in those magical moments that, oh my goodness, that was crazy. But part of being a GM is there's a bit of stress involved because you want people to have fun. And although you're co-creating when it's at its best, and the players really have to help you do that. You're not the only one who's doing that. I'm old, and so perhaps my mindset regarding that is a little bit older, but there was originally a bit of stress about, will this be fun? And so I wasn't that ad-lib improv. I didn't have that ability from the scratch. I may, coming from a play-by-post or wanting to write stories and flash fiction, all those other things, yeah, I may understand characterization, description, scene, but how do you manage that? I didn't do that at the beginning. I had to have something there to relieve that stress while I was trying to decide. And then the more you play, the better you get at it. And so I watched a lot of game master forums on YouTube. I watched a lot of very different places, how to be a better game master from many different sources. And read articles and watched what they posted. And because I have like the very first edition of Robin Law's How to Be a Good Game Master, it's like this big. And I have my first edition AD&D book, and I read a lot. There comes a point where reading and watching knowledge, you have to put aside for application. You have to practice it, and you have to find what you're good at and how to make that how do you learn? And the only way to do that is to play a lot of games, and to then see what works and how do I do that, and then go back and read it again and say, okay, maybe I do that, maybe do that. And so when you're young, when you're starting out, as we all do, we make mistakes. We want the players to get past this moment, but they keep failing. And we keep having roll dice and they keep failing. We keep having roll dice, they keep failing. Yeah, just let them fail on the first one and give them a consequence, but that takes a while to learn. And then also that balance of knowing what's going to happen, and then relieving your stress that it's up to you to make it fun. Like,
do you think narrative style games where a lot of this agency, like for both the GM and the players, kind of left up to the individual, and there aren't necessarily rules around everything that you want to do, perhaps like in Pathfinder, where there seems to be a rule for
no,
everything?
I think
Is it easier to play those rules heavy games as opposed to more rules light games for starting out, do you think?
I think rules heavy games give them a framework that's a little bit maybe easier to work from, because we all play rules heavy first. I don't know if, and even Maya played rules heavy first. She played Pathfinder, for goodness sake. I grew up with first edition AD&D and Pathfinder, and third edition and fifth. Yeah, I didn't really play fifth edition that much, but I played a lot of Pathfinder. What you eventually do is go outside the lines. And once you've played games that have very robust rule system that are very finicky that tell you can do this and do this and do this and do this and do this, and this is what it looks like. You go outside those lines, and then you start playing games where and the GM looks at you and says, what does that look like? Like, what does it do? What does it do? Just like in your game, this is a spoiler, I used a skill that is written as a combat skill, vigorous growth. It's a combat skill. You're going to do this much damage, and it's going to hold them and restrain them. It's simply a combat skill. Well, that's typical Pathfinder, typical Crunchy. Like, you got this skill, you could do it for this, and it's the way it's written. It's a combat skill. I did not use it as a combat skill. I used it to make Ninsu's coffin and Ninsu's dais that raises them up, because I'm outside the lines of what that skill is written for. And so when you're starting, eventually you start thinking outside the lines. It doesn't have to be that I'm going to kill something with it or fight something with it or do that. I can use any of those things in there in a manner that's unpredictable. And Daggerheart is a great pseudo crunchy system, but it still has that kind of crunch in it that you think it limits you, but the only limitation is you creatively changing that thing. Like, vigorous growth is not just a combat skill. I could use it for all sorts of things. Could I use it to make a ladder? Yeah, I probably could. Who cares what it says? It does a D8 plus whatever damage. And restrains things, but I could use it for a ladder. I could use it to make a coffin for Ninsu, because I'm thinking outside the lines. I think eventually, as you play crunchy games, then they start to restrain your creativity a little bit. And you may like that. You may like those very crunchy games, very simulation kind of games that gives you everything that happens. But at some point, you may feel that it's limiting what you'd like to do. You want to think outside the lines. And you can do that with Pathfinder. You could take their skills and make them completely something else.
You can even see that, I think, more so in the Dimension 20 games, where they do use systems like D&D, but Brennan he draws outside the lines all the time. And I think there comes a point in time, and I think you nailed it. For me anyway, I can totally relate to it, where the mechanics and the system itself start to limit you in a way that you think, okay, maybe there's another system that will allow me that creative expression, and I'm not so much restrained by the lines. Because if you have someone at the table that is very much rules as written, that's fair, and that's the kind of game they want to play. But I'm finding.
Yeah, but that's probably your table too.
Yeah.
And you also, as a GM, you build those guidelines, those ballpark things. And the problem is, even though I like collecting a lot of stuff, you can use any system to play anything, as long as you don't let it limit you. You could strip it down like they did with Nimble, which is fantastic. I haven't played Nimble, but you could strip it down. But you don't necessarily have to. Can you play a narrative game with Pathfinder? Oh, most definitely. Are you going to roll dice a lot? Probably not, but that's something different. For narrative games, I don't know if you could do it with Rollmaster, but you could do it. You just have to allow yourself to step off the path into the forest. Where does this go? And your players will do that sometimes. Your players will push you. Can I do this thing? Does this work? And you want to say yes and that. There's many times you say yes and if it's something that really breaks things or something that really isn't, then it's no but. But most of the time it's yes and you will develop things you have no idea that.
I find, like, when I play D&D, I don't play D&D as much anymore, but when I played it, I really enjoyed playing with people who've never played it before, because they have no context of what they can or cannot do, so they just come up with whatever. And I love that. So that's cool. One thing I found in your games, and when I've had the privilege of having you at the games that I run, that you are extremely descriptive and very visual with your descriptions. Where does that come from, and how do you?
Writing.
Is
It
that
comes
from
from
your writing?
yeah. I mean, you read it about games too. Like a lot of game masters or a lot of things you read was, a sight, a sound, a color, a scent. Um, as a game master, if you can just add a little bit of detail, sight, sound, color, scent to that, and it doesn't have to be a lot. Um, it's just a little bit. And I also think my descriptive nature comes from writing. I'm not nearly as good, obviously, if I'm writing because I can think about different words that convey a different meaning. Whereas when you're improving it verbally, um, my mind just doesn't move quite as fast. But it's from that idea where I probably started more as a writer, writing stories because I didn't have anyone to play with. And then I wrote flash fiction and wrote other things, and then played play by post, where it can be a writing exercise in a game. And then when you're GMing and you're watching a lot of YouTube and a lot of game mastery ideas and that sort of thing, or you're reading, a lot of people will say, a sight, a sound, a color, a taste. And that's what I do. A lot of times, even with my character in your game, he tracks by scent, not by visual. He's got a familiar who's this big giant yellow bee. And I put sounds in there and colors and describe that. I think that's part of it. Part of it is coming from a writing background, even though that's not what I do for my job. And then creative and reading books. That $10 I got from my parents starting in the third grade. Reading books. I don't really read as much now because I don't have time. But that kind of descriptive nature to set up the scene, I think if you can add that, and it doesn't have to be very difficult, it's really just a sight, a sound, a smell, a color. You don't have to do all of them. The five senses, pick 3 or pick 2. And it will enliven that game, visually if you practice doing it.
Where would you say you get most of your inspiration from? Like, is it books? Is it watching other game masters? Or like what helps fuel that creativity for you?
That time when you're 56, 57, having read in the old days, having read things like when you're really young, Piers Anthony and Isaac Asimov and those type of things. And then reading short stories of wide fiction, fantasy, science fiction that blurs the lines, and then I don't watch much TV. I don't play much video games either. And then the books themselves, the RPG books have a wealth of ideas and being creative and just spurring that. I think originally it comes from growing up as a kid reading fantasy novels when we didn't have anything. We had TV that just played certain things. VCS recorders only came out when I was a little bit older, so maybe you could record it and watch it later. But what was on was what was on, and what is on in the summer when you're a kid, soap operas, and you're not going to watch that when you're 10 or 12 and left alone. And that kind of, I think it came from reading lots of fantasy and science fiction, and then writing. So I've always done that. I was actually my kid's tooth fairy and Rato and Perez, and I would write them notes in very flowery language and make a little story about taking their teeth. I've always done
Awesome.
that. So it's
Tooth
more
fairies
of
terrorized me, by the way, but
right. Being as big as storyteller and reading a lot. And then also the game books inform you now that RPG books are so massive. Even some of the things are pretty big. And so from that background, when I play a game like Mothership, which is very lean, Mothership gives you enough to hang yourself on, but doesn't really give you a lot to, what do you do? What is the space in between? It's a trifold. And if you can run a trifold, that's pretty much improv ad-lib. That kind of, even though Mothership is different, but if you're going to run Mothership, I've already watched Alien. I'm going to read the book. I'm going to do that. How do I run horror? But horror is kind of difficult. But Mothership is a trifold, and so there's just enough to hang yourself on. But you don't have a lot of. How do you get them in there? How do you get them out? Where are they going to go? What happens when they go here? You don't know. There's nothing in between the lines of that trifold. It's very thin.
Just for those of us who don't know what a trifold is, can you explain that concept?
Yeah, it's a fold up. It's a little pamphlet, like you were getting a pamphlet from Mormons walking at your door. Little pamphlet opens up into a trifold, and it really has the basic premise of what's going on. Why is it happening? Who's there? What does it kind of look like? But there's not a lot else there. Sometimes, like Mothership does add, if you read their trifolds or people, they do add scents, colors, that sort of thing in there, very sparsely, single word things. But here's what's happening. Here's where they are. Here's what the goals may be, but there's no in between. There's not a lot of there may be some characterization, but not a lot. And it's bare bones. It's somewhat like 24XX, which is a lot of games on itch.io. 24XX is pretty slim too. You roll your characters on a sheet, and this is what you can do. And then the GM may roll a couple of dice to say, this is where you are, and then you just go from there. So it's kind of like that, as opposed to a written adventure like Agrella, which is Symbaroum, City of Eternal Euphoria. It's even this one is 176 pages. I think the adventure is the last. Yeah, the adventure is the last 100 pages. The first half is just talking about the city, so you get a background of what the city is, and then the next half is just adventure. That's 100 pages. That's completely different than running a trifold. And you could take that same thing in Mothership, and it may be 3 or 4 or 5 trifolds to make the same adventure, but it's very minimal. You gotta.
It's a lot up to the game master and the players, I suppose, to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, and you ask them a lot of questions, and you yes and a fair amount.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I personally, I think I've moved away from like pre-written adventures and that, just because, and that's what I think one of the biggest reasons why I moved from D&D to Daggerheart is because I find the system and the approach to storytelling much more in line with the types of stories that I like to explore.
So is the present story we're in just ad-lib?
Completely, 100%.
That's good.
It's
fantastic as a player. Because that kind of gaming is where the magic is. Sometimes you can get it in pre-written ones, but a lot of times it's a good game to a great game. Sometimes it sucks because you're not on the same wavelength. Everyone has a bad day. You got 4 or 5 people there who work and they're tired and they're mentally drained, and the GM, it just may not be firing on all cylinders. And that kind of game really takes a give and take. But other times, it's absolute pure magic. You finish the game going, wow, that's just impressive, impressively amazing, and I didn't have a plan. People will ask you, like, as the players, they go, how did you do that? and they may not believe you that largely that was improv, but it's improv in a way that it's a give and take between them and you. And you knowing them and their characters and the group as a whole, you create this line that seems to be plot point A, B, C, D, but you didn't even know what A was. And you get to D and it's magic. You're just like,
And I think in order for games like that to work, there has to be a lot of trust between the players and GM. And GM has to trust the players to move the story forward, to narrate their perspectives.
and as a player too in that game, you got to be aware that that's what the game is built to do. Stress reduction to find this. You're telling a story together, but they also have to have their characters do things that motivate that forward and also enmesh themselves in some way to what the GM's doing. I say you go out of the lines a lot, but that line has to be parallel in some degree and intersect in some fashion with what the GM is doing, because if you have 4 people going way outside the lines, the GM is pulling their hair out because, they're going here and here. Now, I've played with 8 people where they were split into 3 groups with 3 people here and 3 people here and 2 people here, and it was fantastic. But because they are all going different places, but you have to, as a player, also not be so into that character that you don't derail that. You don't put too many guardrails on where the GM is leading you to. You do want to follow that a little bit. Just like in your game, I had no idea what the shoe was. And I'm trying to figure out what the heck the shoe it means. And as a player, I know what the shoe is now. And I know what that scene was. But at the time, I was thinking to myself, Andrew, what the hell is this? Has nothing to do with that. This has nothing to do with that skill. He's supposed to be talking to the soul of Ninsu, but he's not getting it. And I rolled good. And the reason is that, yeah, I rolled good and I was successful, but you're displaying something that I have no idea what it is, and I hadn't figured it out yet. And and at that moment, I'm kind of in a kerfuffle because I don't know what to do with that. When you come back to me and say, "Where's my shoe?" I'm thinking to myself, "What do I do with that?" What? And I'm at a loss improv for the moment because I'm hit with this non sequitur that has nothing to do with what I'm trying to have my character do. And so I have to lay back a little bit, which was nice because the other characters decided to do something while I'm trying to figure out what the heck. Because if you would have stayed on me, I would have been like, and it took me a while to figure. And that's the same sort of thing, is that although I had my character want to do something that seemed to help move the plot forward and converse with Ninsu's soul, that wasn't what I was going to get. And my dice roll was successful, but it was a yes, but. And I didn't figure out what the but meant until near the end of the session. And then as a player, I understand, well, that was fantastic. I was completely thrown for a loop. It was a moment that I was like screwing around trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do because I had no idea. The shoe didn't give me anything to work with. And at the end, I realized what that meant, because you're leading me and I'm allowing you to do that because I'm lost a little bit and I'm not pushing the event. And I'm also not pushing you as a player saying, hey, Andrew, I made that roll. I should be able to talk to a soul. Well, that's okay because it's not what it's going to happen. As a player now, I know what that probably means, but as the character, he does not. And so what do I do with that? Which is really interesting.
I think I am very fortunate to have such an amazing cast of collaborators at that table too, because each and every one of you are amazing storytellers in your own right. So,
and you make mistakes as a player too. So occasionally you're going to step off a little bit or do something that doesn't mesh well or gets lost. And you may have a reason to do it, but it's opaque or do something, and you have to pull back a little bit. Pull back. Okay, that didn't work. I'm not going to go down that line a little bit. I'm going to pull back a little bit and get
That's
myself back. Get
that's
myself.
another skill. I think that a lot of like people maybe new to TTRPGs don't see players and GMs. I think that's the difference. I think in the story we're telling, it's very collaborative in nature. You're always thinking about the other players or the GM. Where's the story going? As opposed to, I have a character, I have like a 100-page backstory. I really want to.
Yeah, I don't. I have a pretty crazy backstory, but it's all in my head and it's not that long. The backstory is something you should jettison. I have enough of a backstory that I have a built-in twist and a couple other things, but I'm willing for that never to come out, never to be recognized, never, because it may not. And I'm willing to play to see who Wanik is. And also as a player in those type of games, it takes a while to sometimes inhabit that character. Some people are very good. Maya and Michael, their characters are fantastic, and Symbaroum is fantastic, and they inhabit him pretty quickly. But if you're playing a character, and that's where playing something different, like a Fungror, the problem with playing non-human characters is, how do I make them not human? How do they think? What is their lifestyle like? Because otherwise you're just playing a human with horns, which is okay, but you have to do that. And sometimes you will step outside the line or say something that you have a particular reason for saying it, but it doesn't work. So you pull that back and watch the players, which is a little bit hard to do on video. Even as a GM, there are moments you think everything is going crazy and no one's liking what's happening. You start to sweat a little bit, at least in the early days. You're stressed out because you think no one's having fun. And I play a lot of my games without video, so I can't see them. There are players I play for 3 or 4 years, and I don't know what they look like. I know their voice, but and a lot of times it is an internal concern that's not real. They're having a great time, but you can't tell. And you're all worried about it, but they think it was fantastic. And so some of that's internal. Same thing with a character. There was a moment or two where I was playing him, I couldn't figure him out, and I had to draw him back a little bit, and I'm still trying to figure him out a little bit. Because I made him different. I made him completely weird. But
I don't know if you heard that, GeneT, but that was the sound of the dinner bell.
No, I didn't.
So that brings us wrap up, I guess, this conversation. Although I'd really like to get into more of what you just said there. I think there's a whole other conversation there. But thank you so much for your time today. It was wonderful having this one-on-one chat with you. Don't get to do that often enough.
We have to get you on here.
But before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to promote anything that you're working on, whether it be in the work still or something that's active. Like,
I've been off a month. A lot of people know I had surgery. I've been off a month. I haven't played for 5 weeks. I needed that time. I'm going to continue the Mothership game. It's probably going to go to every other week because I'd really like to start a Wild Sea game and seg that into every other week. And I only have a certain number of days to play. I'm going to have to draw back down. Instead of running 3 games a week, it's going to have to be 2 days. And I'd really like to play Wild Sea. I was thinking about Household, but I've already started working on Wild Sea. I was going to play it at the convention until I backed out. And that was going to be the start of Wild Sea on Looking for Mom. And so that should be coming out soon. I really just took this month off completely. I thought I would work on it, but I needed to
That's all
breathe.
good. All good.
Right.
I'm really looking forward to Wild Sea, and I really want to have a seat at that table.
Yeah, the best. What is it? My Two Little Mice or My First Table has a fantastic Wild Sea just audio podcast.
My First Dungeon, right? Yeah.
My First Dungeon, and I don't listen to many, but I listen to that when I'm working out, or I was walking on a treadmill or something, or partially working. That's a pretty good
I haven't heard that
podcast,
one yet.
and
I'm gonna
it's
listen to it.
it has a fair number. It has a fair amount of mechanics in it. It's narrative in a sense, and they're fantastic players, but it has a fair number of mechanics where you can kind of get an idea of how Wild Sea really runs. I think it's a great system.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
I really want to get my hands dirty with that system too.
Gorgeous books.
It is. So where can people find you?
Mostly I'm looking for Mom. I'm also run a Symbaroum game restart once a week on the other server I started way back in called Tabletop Hobos. And that's mostly, I'm not really on YouTube or Twitter or Blue Sky or that sort of thing. I'm mostly with Looking for Mom. And
all right. If you don't mind, I'll share the link to the Tabletop Hobos Discord.
Sure.
Is that okay with you? All right. Where you can join. It's the West March style Symbaroum game, is it?
It started as West March because it was West March Forbidden Lands, and now it's more kind of conventional long-term campaign.
Okay. All right. But I'll put that link in the show notes below once the VOD goes up. And I just want to say thank you once more, Gene.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Right. Good to see you on a Saturday.
Yeah, everyone.